أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear brothers and sisters, to Get to the Batin of It. A space where, inshallah, over the next few days, we want to explore some topics at the intersection of epistemology, science, mathematics, and most importantly, religion. In particular, Islam, and in particular, the teachings of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and his immaculate family and progeny, peace and blessings be upon them all. So, for today's topic, I want to talk about something that might be a little bit cliche. It's a topic that comes up at the beginning and end of every month of Ramadan. And you probably guessed it, but in case you haven't, it's the topic of moon sightings. So, you might be thinking, well, I've heard enough about moon sightings, and why are we talking about this again? As I mentioned, it's a bit cliche, but I hope you'll bear with me, because we're going to explore this topic from maybe a little bit of a different perspective than what you might be used to. Specifically, we're going to explore this topic from the perspective of epistemology. Now, what is epistemology? For those of you who might not be familiar, epistemology literally means theory of knowledge. It's a branch of philosophy, along with ontology, axiology, ethics, metaphysics, and basically it's about where does our knowledge come from? What are authoritative sources of knowledge? How do we come to know what we know? And what is justified knowledge? What is justified true belief? So let me make this concrete for you with a story, an anecdote. So a few years back, it was the end of the month of Ramadan. At least it was for me. I believed it to be the 30th of the month of Ramadan, based on the rulings of my marja. While others in my area were celebrating the day of Eid on that day, Eid al-Fitr. And so I was congratulating some people on the phone who were celebrating the day of Eid, and somehow I got into conversation with the Shaykh. And I don't know the Shaykh, I don't know his name, and so everything I'm going to say is not particularly about this person, but he was telling me that I should not be fasting on that day. I should break my fast because it's the day of Eid, and it's haram to fast on the day of Eid. And he was telling me this because he said this is not something that a marja can determine for us. He was trying to tell me that this is an astronomical issue. And I'm telling you this based on the best of my memory, and he was telling me this in Farsi. Possible I misunderstood, but the point of the story stays the same. So he's telling me this is an astronomical issue, not purely a religious issue. So let's go back to epistemology. Here he's saying that the authoritative source of knowledge on whether today is the day of Eid or not is astronomy, or science. This is not something a marja could say, okay, today is the 30th of the month of Ramadan because some people didn't see the moon in your area, right? Because, for example, if the moon is there, if other people saw the moon, that means the moon is there, no religious opinion can make a difference. At least I believe that's what he was saying. And he was telling me that he studied this for many years, and this is something individuals have to decide for themselves, but because he studied it for many years, I should be listening to his opinion. So, on another level, he's telling me that he's an authoritative source of knowledge on this issue. So, this is where epistemology comes into play. Who should I trust? Should I trust my marja, and anything my marja says goes? Well, the marja often says, here are the rules, you have to apply it in your own circumstances, right? They don't determine it for us, right? So I have to go see if people saw the moon, for example. Or do I trust science? Do I go with astronomy? If astronomical calculations tell me that the moon should have been present on that day, can I just go with that? Do I trust this person who seems to be an expert in astronomy and is a sheikh, right? Do I trust my local imam, right? Where does our knowledge come from? And in particular, what I want to explore is this issue of, is it an astronomical issue or is it a religious issue? And this is important because sometimes people might say, why do they still go out and look for the moon? Why can't they use tools or telescopes, right? Some might say you can, but some might just still say no, it has to be seen with the naked eye. Or why can't we just rely on calculations? If science can tell us the answer, why are we not listening to science? Are we backwards? Are we, not progressing with the times by still relying on primitive means for looking for the moon, for determining the first of the month? Society's advanced so much since the time of the Prophet. Why are we still resorting to the same methods that they used back then? We're not completely, right? So I believe most, maybe if not all marjas, would say that you can use astronomical calculations to inform the decision. So for example, you can look at calculations that say the moon will be visible in this part of the world, possibly, or it will definitely not be visible in this part of the world. If we know that it definitely won't be visible, then we know that it's not feasible to see the moon. That informs us about that. If it tells us that it's possible that it's visible, though, even scientific calculations, even astronomical models cannot tell us that someone will be able to see the moon, right? Because there's weather conditions, it depends on eyesight, right? A model of the world typically won't factor in human eyesight, right? So there's many other things that go into it, into whether the moon can be seen. And the key thing is that if Islam says that we should be seeing the moon, it's not about whether the moon is present in the sky or not. The moon is always there, in some sense. It's not about whether the new moon was born. It has to do with observation, with seeing the moon. And that's not something science can tell us otherwise. Science can't tell us, look, you Muslims are wrong, you should change your methods because the moon is there on this day, or the moon will be visible in some parts of the world on this day, so you shouldn't depend on somebody else to see the moon on this other part of the world. If Islam is telling us we have to see it, then maybe there's an importance to the act of seeing, to the act of observation. To understand this better, let's go to another question, maybe a more fundamental question in a sense. What is science? What is our epistemology of science? Where does scientific knowledge come from? Or what is authoritative scientific knowledge? Is science just a set of models and calculations that experts give us? Like, these visibility curves, calculations that tell us where the moon is, or in the case of prayer times, these timetables that tell us, what time we can pray Dhuhr or Maghrib or Isha, right? Based on scientific calculations. Where do those models come from? Initially, they came, in most cases, from observations. People had to go and record the patterns of the celestial bodies to figure out patterns, to figure out models, mathematical equations that could tell us where the sun will be, or where the earth will be in relation to the sun at any given time, or where the moon will be in relation to the earth at any given time. Right? It's not like some scientist just dreamed up some models out of nowhere. So observation is key to science, and I'm sure you all know this if you've taken any science classes. It's one of the first steps. We have to collect data, empirical data. And if we actually go back in history, who were the people making these observations? Early on, Muslim scientists, Muslim astronomers were making a lot of these observations that led to mathematical models of these celestial bodies, and that informed, later on, European scientists, and that, through the course of time, led to the models that we have now, the models that we're using now, to figure out when our prayer times are, models of the moon, etc., etc. And interestingly enough, if we go back in time to those days where Muslim scientists were making these observations, they were actually, in many cases, they were interested in astronomy in order to answer questions related to Islamic law. For example, prayer times, how to calculate when the prayer times are. So actually, a lot of observatories were set up, so Muslim astronomers could record, patterns in the motion of the sun, for example. So they could then use that to figure out prayer times. Not only were these large observatories set up, but even mosques had their own individual timekeepers, people that would observe, record, and they would make these large, basically, data sets of prayer times, or times when, I don't know actually what the data looks like, but basically would record the patterns of the motions of the sun and other celestial bodies. And not only were they just recording, sometimes people like this would actually make theoretical advances in science. So the act of observing to record things for the sake of prayer times, right? These were people in mosques, right? Timekeepers of the mosque, led to advances in science in those days. Now, so part of the point is that Islam's encouragement of observation, of looking with your naked eye to figure out where the moon is, right? Or looking with your naked eye to determine when the prayer times are, right? Now, we don't believe today that we have to look with our naked eye for every single prayer, right? That would be a lot, maybe, to ask us to do, right? That everyone would have to figure out when the prayer times are every single day. But we know that every single prayer time corresponds to something out there, to some pattern with the motions of the sun, right? Or the motions of the earth, really. And so observation of natural phenomena that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created is essential. And not only is the point that this actually led to scientific advances, but also that perhaps it has an important significance in our own spiritual pursuits, because our acts of worship are tied to observations of the external world. Now I want to read an ayah for you from the Holy Quran, so we can inshallah receive some barakah from the Quran as well. This ayah is in Surah Fussilat, and it is ayah 53. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. And we will show them our signs in the horizons and in their selves, until it becomes clear to them that He is the real, or that the Quran is the real. So either Allah is the real, or the Quran is the real, or the true. Now, there's different interpretations about which of those, but that's not of significance. The important thing is that Allah is saying that He will make clear to us His signs in the horizons, so the signs that we see in the skies, with the sun, with the moon, and with other celestial bodies, or on the earth, and in our own selves. So we know that the ayat of Allah are out there, and in here, in the microcosm and in the macrocosm, as well as in this holy book. And so Allah wants us to reflect on His signs, and we all know this. But in particular, He's put opportunities for us to reflect on His signs, opportunities that are tied to our acts of worship. So, for example, before each prayer, we can go out and observe, and when we see some change in the natural world, we are told to go and begin our prayers, ideally. But how many of us do this? I, for one, can tell you I don't do this. I rely on these prayer times, right? These timetables that science has given us. But maybe we should take a step back and try to go back to the observations, not because we don't have other means that are more advanced, but because maybe Allah wants us to do that in order to enhance our own spirituality by reflecting on His signs, by connecting the signs in the world to our own worship. And so when we think about both our prayers and our fasting in the beginning of the month of Ramadan and the beginning of every month, maybe we should appreciate more the act of going and seeing the moon, which I know many do, but I for one underappreciate. Not because we don't have mathematical models that could tell us, but because observations are the first step to developing models, but more importantly, are a first step to beginning acts of worship, and are an important step in our own spiritual journeys to reflecting on the creation of Allah, to reflect on the bounties of Allah, and to increase our knowledge of Allah and Islam. So, with that, maybe we can think about this a bit more during these days and nights of the holy month of Ramadan to improve our own actions and our own acts of worship. Please remember all of the mu'mineen and the mu'minat, including myself, in your prayers. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.